You're welcome back. This is Newsfile. It's your most authoritative news analysis platform. And here on Newsfile, we put Ghana first. And Ben Boachi has taken leave of us. And in place of Ben Boachi, we have Doris Anyate. And she will assist us to, as it were, assess the budget, aspects of the budget. What are the sticking points, areas that some people appear to pay a lot more attention to, the communication tax and also the ESLA, the increment in that area, which is going to affect everything. But are there other areas that people are not paying attention? So welcome, Doris.
Thank you,
Anyate. She's a chartered banker and CEO, Crescendo Consult Limited. Thank you very much once again. Now, let me share just a few of your messages with you. And Dr. Theo Champong, you know him. He's been contributing to the debate on the energy issues and the power matters. And he says there is a big difference between a more liquid bank guarantee and an insurance guarantee, regardless of whether the latter has been underwritten by an A-rated agency. Mr. Mesa should come again. We messed up. Let's be honest about it. The state should cancel the PDS agreement and start the process again, or get a new Ghanaian-led ECG management with measurable KPIs. We should ring-fence ECG's toxic assets into SPV underwritten by the Ministry of Finance, and then ensure clean balance sheet with the new management structure. The Morocco-led consortium never had the money for starters to run the ECG asset. You guys, how do you know all this that the MEDA and the government of Ghana didn't know? Okay, Mohammed Tijani Musa says, I think we should not run into conclusions about the missing Takrade girls. They are yet to confirm it. Okay. Akwesi Obeng in Ajuso Besiase, I commend the government for being vigilant about the operations of PDS. Talking about continuing due diligence, right? Some NDC members are speaking as if the performance of PDS was bad. The current problem is about their guarantee, not their performance. Okay, like Musa Abato. Okay, so my guests in the studio are asking you, like, seriously, including Professor Boku. Okay, so Musa Abato and Kumasi says the question is, who changed the conditions precedent to conditions subsequent? The whole PDS transaction is shrouded in underhand dealings. Where in the world will due diligence be done after a contract is duly executed? What's Martin Amidu waiting for? Eja Adam says MIDA supervised the entire process of the ECG PDS concession and all Ghanaians' explanations. I think people who understand the issue at stake must be circumspect and objective in their explanations. A last one, Kwesi Anam says, incompetence at its peak, NPP, we have the men. Okay, John Sewa says, no matter how they try to explain or justify it, it was a fraudulent act. We don't need any explanations. Thank you. So that's where I ended. And then we return to the matter of the mid-year budget review. I'll start with Prof. Bokwing. Beyond the communication service tax, which people are looking at, I've heard a lot of commentary about that. The telcos are not happy because they said they were not even consulted. Also about the IPPs and renegotiating. You know, their chamber also came out to say they are not happy, they were not consulted, and that that's not the tradition. Then the ESLA, you know, that unfortunately, somehow, the government came in earlier, bastardized it, and now is jumping on it and increasing it. People are saying it will affect the kinky we buy. We've forgotten so soon that we used to buy kinky for how much? Now, one CD 50 pesos kinky may not be enough. So, what are we looking at?
Ghana. So, if you look at the macro side, let me break it from there.
If you look at inflation, if you look at interest rates, if you look at policy rate, if you look at those macro indicators, we have seen some improvement. We have seen the policy rate come down to about 16%. Of course, the interest rate, the ultimate lending rate, has not responded in a similar manner. Okay. And I'm sure the reasons are very clear. Even after Bank of Ghana, working with the Ghana Bankers Association, changed the formula for determining banks' base rate from what it was to what we have now as a Ghana reference rate, which was supposed to make it more responsive to market dynamics. We have seen that the average lending rate has not responded in that manner, even though the Ghana reference rate is a bit. I'm sure the banks have also offered their reasons why the rates have been held up at that level, partly also because you can see a transmission from the real sector as a result of the energy crisis to balance sheet of businesses. And that also contributed to the non-performing loans, apart from the state-sponsored non-performing loans that we have seen in the system. Then you want to also look at maybe where inflation was. And these are things that I'm sure any government would want to project because it favors them. If you look at where they took off from end 2016 in terms of where inflation was, where policy rates and all those things, and where we are right now, you can see that. But of course, even when you look at it within the, since 1992, as a country, we haven't moved beyond macroeconomic stability. And therefore, it's going to be very difficult for the ordinary Ghanaian, for businesses to actually feel the impact of those macro level developments, because macroeconomic stability cannot be pursued as an end in itself. It's a means to an end. When we are able to sustain that macroeconomic stability over a long period of time, then it begins to trickle down to the micro level and then maybe to your pocket, or unless you are at a table where the national cake is being shared, because until that is sustained, there's nothing national about the national cake. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
Then you want to look at maybe over the years, we have also seen growth. I mean, growth picked up from where it was in 2016 to about 8-point-something% based on new GDP series. That would come down. Then we ended 2018 with 6.3%. Then again, you want to look at the quality of that growth. And the quality of that growth, I want to link it to the composition, the disaggregation, and then look at the non-oil real GDP, because for me, that's my focus. We haven't seen significant improvement when it comes to the non-oil real sector, and that is a problem. And we can begin to understand why the non-oil real sector has not responded the way it should. And you can trace it to the lack of appropriate investment, capital spending, which I think this government hasn't done quite well in terms of spending sufficiently in the area of, because you need to do that to be able to oil the growth drivers of the economy. And the huge infrastructure deficits along rail, transport, all of that, impose restrictions on the growth drivers of the economy. Then you also want to look at maybe tariffs, you want to look at frictions here and there, which all put together contribute to a high productive cost base of doing business in this country. That itself does not make us competitive. Okay. Why has government failed to spend appropriately? It's because the revenue envelope, even with all that the MPP said when they were in opposition, they have failed to be able to implement all those measures in a manner that enhances the revenue envelope. Because, you see, one basic function of the state is to collect taxes. It's as simple as that. Any country that is inefficient at collecting taxes and yet wants to engineer inclusive growth will just end up in a debt trap. And that is where we find ourselves. And when I say that there isn't a significant difference here when you look at the MPP and then when you look at the NDC, along the way our revenue envelope have performed over the years, the reason is simple. We have not been able to find a solution to why our revenue envelope remains dwarfed. I will give you an example. So we want to spend, revenue remains dwarfed. The way we have sought to manage it over the years is to do expenditure cuts. The areas that are more flexible to cut has to do with the capital spending. Because when it comes to wages and salaries and all of that, you cannot touch it. When it comes to interest payment, you cannot do anything. Okay. Beyond a certain point, a further expenditure, capital spending restrictions would hurt growth, and that is where we find ourselves. Pick it from 2008, and there is to put the two parties within a certain context. Public debt, we are told, end of 2008 was around 9.5 billion cedis. By the time the NDC left, end of 2016, it had gone up to 122.3 billion cedis.
We dispute that figure, but when you get to our time.
I'm quoting official sources.
It's okay, I'm quoting official sources, the Bank of Ghana source.
Yeah.
But you finish.
I'm
sorry.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Others put it, initially put it at 132.
200 and...
Yes. So I'll come to that. Okay. So between January 2009 and then December 31st, 2016, the debt stock had moved from 9.5 billion cedis to 122.3 billion cedis. Just calculate the growth rate, perhaps it's over 1,000%. Between January 2017 and June 2019, it has moved up from the 122.3 billion to about 204 or so billion cedis. You can also calculate that growth rate. Of course, you can look at exchange rate, that is also contributing to that and all of that. The issue is that because the revenue envelope remains dwarfed, we tend to borrow. We borrow part for liability management, part for capital spending, and all of that. So the question that you see, and we can actually scale up. I don't know. When I say I don't know, because we tend to be more efficient when we are not in government in terms of the things that we say and all of that. We'll do this. But I don't know what happens when we find ourselves in government. Because we can even compare our revenue performance to our peers, even if not against our potential. Even against our peers, we are doing far below what our peers are doing. Our domestic revenue envelope scaled by GDP is less than 15%. When you look at tax revenue, it's just about 12.6% based on the new GDP series. Our peers are doing 20%. Others are doing 23%. In fact, if we're able to scale up from the 12.6% to about 20%, there may be no need for us to borrow in terms of deficit financing because primary balance is positive. And if you look at the difference, it's less than 15 billion cedis.
Okay.
This we have failed. We have introduced VAT. Then we tend to undo that through exemptions. and Ghana, as we speak right now, our VAT efficiency is one of the lowest in sub-Saharan Africa. Then you can also talk about our tax frontier that is very high. But so what it means that we can actually scale up our revenue envelope without burdening the faithful few. And this we have not been able to do well. But I'm also curious because in the media review, and in the media we were told that when it comes to personal income tax and then corporate income tax, we exceeded our targets. And I'm wondering, what targets are these? That same country where we exceeded our target, statistics suggest that our personal income tax productivity, corporate income tax productivity is below the average, even within West Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa. So you can see that we are just not doing enough to be able to rake in the much needed revenue. Of course, we can talk about the informal sector and all of that.
So if you can conclude on what you see to be the implications, even though as you speak, I can tell what they are, but say them by yourself. Let's hear you.
So we are not heading well. We are not heading well unless we do something quite drastic about this. And that is why even though it hurts for government to adjust the CST and then the ESLA, it's like we find ourselves where perhaps it's like this is what is available to us. Then we tend to sympathize a bit. But you are looking at the real effect because when it comes to ESLA, which will translate to petroleum prices, even when you look at the Ghana Living Standard Survey, the proportion of the disposable income, the average Ghanaians that they spend on transportation is very high. Then it fits into other prices and all of that. Look, the kenke seller, may decide to adjust the price or the size or the quality as a result of all of this. And so because of that, we have borrowed. But the real effect of that borrowing is to look at how much we are setting aside for debt servicing, which is far more than what we are setting aside for capital spending.
Okay.
It's 19 billion per the allocation we saw.
Okay.
And this is crowding out priority spending.
Let's hear from Doris. And look, it may sound populist, but there's another statesman who spoke to me and he said, okay, so the budget is in again, and you are sounding as if you were expecting things to go down. Look, you must be naive to think that things will ever come down. They will always go up.
In fact, prices are downward sticky, upwardly flexible.
He says that is what you find in Africa and Ghana. So he asked me the question, what do you think our leaders actually know to do in managing the state? All they do is tax, take your money. Yet we live on borrowing, yet they are wasteful and they are corrupt. That for him is our problem. Okay, so Doris, break it down. As far as you are concerned, what sticks out in the media review, and how does it look for, you know, my mother who is in the village and hoping to make good use of one CD?
I was closely listening to Professor Bokpin's argument, and I think it's interesting that he made mention of the challenges that we have with the public purse.
Right.
And I think that's one area where we have the greatest challenges. And because let me say that desperate situations tend to call for desperate measures, and that probably is what I would like to sum the mid-year budget review as.
Okay.
I can see some effort towards remedying the situation. Let me also come from the perspective of what we are doing on the revenue side. And Prof mentioned the fact that the faithful few that can be taxed directly currently seem to be overburdened.
Right.
I mean, we have about a 6 million active workforce, out of which you would find only 20% that pay direct taxes. So the whole public envelope that we are making reference to actually is a burden of 25%. And so I would agree that there's a lot of room to scale up by roping in the remaining 75% who are largely engaged in the informal sector.
I've heard that cliche since I graduated from KG, I suppose.
I recall when I had just graduated from University of Ghana for my first degree, I actually did participate in an operation they called Operation Dragnet, and that was some efforts by the then IRS to try to expand the tax net. So we had to go out to the marketplaces, but it hasn't been very effective. So to summarize it, what I would like to say as far as room for expanding the public purse, which is woefully inadequate as we speak, is to look at what we can do. Government has attempted to use indirect taxes. VAT is one area that they have explored, but again, because of weaknesses in the system, you've had a situation where some organizations register, but they are not actually charging. They are not issuing the VAT invoices. And so the leakage still persists. And then you would say that indirect taxes like VAT are also consumption dependent, and the typical rational person will try to readjust whatever they are spending is. So if there are items in there that attract very high consumption taxes, they will try to either consume less of that or completely take it off their spending list. And so again, the leakage would continue to persist. I think on that score, one thing that could help would be the fiscal electronic devices, the point of sale devices that were supposed to be issued. That is still pending.
Okay.
If that was deployed, we would have a situation where the tax authorities are able to keep closer track over sales, and therefore we will minimize the loopholes for leakage as far as indirect taxes are concerned. The plus that I would like to give on that note, as far as the positives that have been achieved in boosting the revenue envelope, is in the successful implementation of the tax policy stamp.
Okay.
I mean, the act was passed way back in 2013, but it didn't come into force until, I think, 2018, and even that was not without agitation by corporate Ghana, but through a lot of engagement, that has been passed. Until that tax stamp policy was passed, what happened was that there are products that can come onto the market and businesses would under-declare, but you have no means of verifying. But where you are required now to affix the stamp, then it's nearly impossible for you to sell an item without declaring, because you buy the stamp in advance. So I think that has contributed to boosting the revenue envelope. And also, let me quickly say that the decoupling of the Get Fund bit and then NHIL from the consumption tax VAT is also a positive development, because it's made it possible for institutions like the Get Fund to secure a syndicated fund, because now they can sort of predict the amount that is due to them. It's stable. And so they have the opportunity to now support their own infrastructural development to boost the education sector. So that's some spending that would have been difficult for government to achieve, given the amount that is left. But by this policy change of decoupling, it's made it possible for the Get Fund to do this. And then Prof also mentioned the abuse of exemptions. We have very huge tax exemptions. So if you do A, then you're exempted from this for so many years. And there are those organizations that would register in a certain name and operate under those terms and conditions and metamorphose into something else after a while, just to continue to enjoy these exemptions. And I know that under the recent IMF regime, that's supposed to be addressed, and there's a bill before Parliament. If there's anybody here that can speak to that, that would be great. I was
waiting for an update on that. The exemption bill, we are told, is gone to Parliament. I didn't see a lot of things said about it in the media.
Yeah. So
maybe Honorable, they are here. So
when he gets there, I believe that he can touch on that, because that would be a great thing to address. And then it's interesting that in the mid-year review budget as well, there was indication of efforts to try and strengthen their port services, because that's another source of leakages. There's a lot of international trade that happens, but we are not able to get international trade taxes. We always have underperformance from that area. And so strengthening the services at the ports would be good in helping to boost the envelope. For example, goods that are in transit through Ghana are supposed to be exempted from tax payment. And so there's a lot of imports that pass through as in transit, but ultimately end up on our market. So if we are able to find a way to tighten that, to track, I think tracking, if we're able to track the goods such that they actually end up in that final destination, which is originally supposed to be outside Ghana, that would be good. And if we track and we find that they end up on our domestic market, then we can, should I say, require them to pay the relevant taxes. But as far as the envelope is concerned, there is the inflow side and there is the outflow side. So while we talk about taxes and we talk about the burden, the few 25% that are burdened, and we have so much room to try and bring in the 75%. And in my view, to be able to harness the contribution that the 75% can make, you need a very strong identification system. It's coming back to tracking. If you can't track the 75% out of the 6 billion active workforce, how do you get them to actually contribute to the revenue pairs of the state? Are
the fears of the increment in the ESLA genuine, that it will, cascade, affect everything else? I believe so.
I believe so, because this is definitely going to end up in petroleum and in transportation. And the average citizen has, to move from one place to the other. And so their costs are going up. It's going to affect whatever their sources of income generation may be. And they would also pass it on. And so the cycle would continue. I think of great concern is how much we are disbursing out of the public envelope. Because we have a very huge public sector. So if you look at employee compensation, whatever that is mobilized, up to about 53% using the Q1 2019 figures is going to cover for employee wages, salaries, and Senate and stuff like that. And then you get about 37% thereabout to also service debt. And that's a sore point for us, because in our country, infrastructure is financed by the government. And there as well, you see a mismatch between the spending and the source of payment, because infrastructural projects tend to be very long-term projects. If you are constructing a road and overhead, it's going to take quite a number of years before you even complete the project, before you begin to see benefits.
We never actually finish paying, and the cost continues to go, sometimes becomes more than double.
We don't finish on time.
Exactly. And yet these are financed by our annual budgets, which are short-term in nature. And so it creates a burden resulting from this mismatch, where there's pressure to constantly find funds to refinance. And at the end of the day, if you look at the numbers, we are always going to be running a deficit on the domestic front, because if we're able to do something about the wage bill, that would go a very long way.
Okay.
If we are able to also implement the Ghana Infrastructure Investment Bond, the GIF, whose operationalization has delayed, I believe that it would also address this funding challenge, which places so much pressure on our domestic.
Okay.
budget.
So if you don't mind, you can pause there. And she's taking us through quite a whole lot, pointing to the positives and things that need, tweaking to, as we always say, pushing the citizens a bit more. Now, I heard you say, when I heard the ESLA was, the luxury tax was removed, I just said, ouch, I had just gone to pay.
You should have just waited.
I had just gone to pay.
But you still pay.
All right. So I heard you say that's nothing to praise anybody for. But the minister said they are a listening government. And that's what they have done. They have listened to the plight of the citizens and removed that tax. The spare parts dealers have also been hailing that.
Well, first of all, the revenues that they were expecting, they couldn't get those revenues. In fact, they got just about 20% or less of what they were expecting. So this issue of a listening
From
government,
that tax.
From that tax is neither here nor there. Number two, even though we've repealed that law, whatever you choose to call it, everybody who owes will still go and pay. So it's not as if those who haven't paid have been exempted. So right from the time, the law was passed to date, if it's taking like 1 year, it's annually. When you go to renew your license today, you would have to pay that liability. Because at the committee meeting, the lawyers indicated that if you say that nobody should pay, then those who have paid, they will be entitled to come for a claim.
No.
That's what the lawyers told us. You lawyers
Because
can
I
deal
thought
with
that from 1st August
Yes.
or so. I'm
What
not a lawyer,
happened is that
but
going forward,
Right.
you won't pay.
going forward from 1st
From
August.
1st August,
Right.
Yes.
you won't pay back the outstanding liability which you should have paid.
How do you determine that?
I'm saying that the law was passed from a particular date. How would I want to determine that? It's very easy.
Okay.
I'm with Parliament with you.
So I've,
Let me
like
go
I
to
did
the-
for all of
let me
them,
go
I've
to
seen you've made some notes here. Yes. What should we pay attention to? What should we pay
You see,
attention to in
the
the media
budget,
review?
Prof and Madam, they've laid the foundation for it. So I'll try and just follow up on that. The budget is actually in two parts. Gives us the outcomes for 2018. Well, the budget is presented in November,
But then
and it would have given
availability
you
of
3
data,
quarters.
yeah.
So now is the time to look at the real outcomes for 2018, and then the report on the first 2 quarters, 2019, give us an assessment and how the minister intends ending the year in terms of the budget. So if you look at 2018,
Savings in procurement and all of that, He took us through
what's this saving
about
program?
3 different,
Your ministers present an
3 separate
inflated figure.
years under
You reduce it,
and you got 0 savings for the country.
So what is the
your
savings?
ministers were presenting accurate
figures?
That's why there was
Accurate
no savings.
figures.
Okay.
You present inflated figures, you reject them and you tell us that they are savings.
Thank you for that.
Now listen,
And we know the corruption is in the procurement.
you see, the revenue target was 49. They ended up with 47. So you see that there was a negative variance. But when you check the expenditure side, even though there was a slight reduction, it's not commensurate in terms of the revenue target. So I think that going forward, governments ought to be realistic. Because it would appear that every time we miss our revenue targets. So I think
It's not unique to this government.
Yes, so that's why I said it appears that we,
Okay.
and I'm saying that it's time for us to begin to look at what some of those assumptions and then get a bit more realistic. But like Prof said, you also want to look at where the expenditure is going into. Because that's critical for you. If you take compensation, you take interest payment and statutory payments, it takes virtually a chunk of it. But then you go and look at where the money is actually going. So if you look at goods and services, they budgeted 3.6, ended up spending 5. That's a huge variance. But then when you go and look at capital expenditure, infrastructure, they budgeted 6, they spent 4. A very bad negative one for me. And like you said, we should begin to look at the capital expenditure side because we're spending so much on goods and services and we're spending very, very little on infrastructure or what you call capital expenditure. So I think that that should be a major area of concern for all of us. Then it would appear that oil revenues are doing very, very well. They projected about 3 billion, they got about 5 billion. That's a huge increment because, one, the volumes went up, 2, because the benchmark prices also went up. And so it would appear that oil is really, really holding us. And I think that we ought to be looking at that sector because oil can slump at any time. You never know when. But in 2016, we got 972 million. 2017, they got 2.3 billion. From 2.3, it went to about 5 billion. This year, they're expecting 6.5 billion. So consistently, there's been a hike in terms of revenues accruing from oil. So if you have a particular year where oil comes down.
Look, even that one is not really, I mean, how much is 6 billion cedis? From all the oil we have been talking about, all this while, how much is it?
That is why you underscore the fact that when you look at the 2017 growth rate, which is a hike, and you compare that to the 2016, and you look at the non-oil, I think it's both 4.6, 4.6. So it's the oil that really
is determining
all this,
and we are
not necessarily real growth. And I think that we ought to be looking at some of these issues because it's going to play out going forward. I was also looking at the debt service. It's moved from 14 to the 19. That's a huge amount.
Because in nominal terms, it has gone up.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. And I remember one day you talked about even the structure, where the foreign component appears to be going up. And so even the exchange rate alone pushes your debt up. So I think that's another area we ought to be looking at.
I just wanted to add that when you look at the 2019 debt management report, you can see that the weighted average interest cost tend to be coming down, even though in nominal terms is going up.
Because of the long-term nature of some of the
reprofiling and all of that. But
well, I didn't look at the tenor.
It didn't start with the MPP. It's actually part of the debt management strategy from 2015 as part of the IMF program and all of that. So the rate of debt accumulation started declining from there after it went up by about 50% from 2013 to 2014. It started declining a bit. But you can also talk about
but today, if you look at the debt
sector,
to GDP, yes, but that is what you are grappling with. That's the reality.
Yes.
Whether financial sector or not, you are virtually hitting 58 today.
Yes.
Which is
based on the new GDP.
Yeah, based on the new GDP.
Yeah.
Yes, it's very huge. And if you look at 2016, 2017, 18 now, it would appear that we ought to be watching that. It's important because you and I know that the size of your GDP doesn't even pay your debt. It is a revenue that you are able to raise. So you could have a bigger GDP. If you don't raise enough revenue like we are all saying, you are going to have a major, major problem. And if you look at the rate, if you look at tax revenue, for instance, I don't think we are doing very well there. The decoupling of the tax, business are also complaining. that now they can't do the input-output. And so the 25% we're talking, the conversion,
and then
the 5% that were converted from input-output to a direct one. A lot of the businesses are complaining that hitherto they could do input-output. Today, as it stands, they cannot. And so that's another area we ought to be looking at. Now let's take the current taxes that we are going to be dealing with. I have broadly categorized them into 4. There's the communication service, price stabilization, energy debt recovery, and then the road fund. I've looked at the figures and I've done the apportionment. Only 20% of that goes into so-called capacity charges or take-or-pay issues. So I think we should put that within the right perspective so that we look at what goes into road fund. Because in 2018, road fund got an amount of 1.33 billion. Only 680 million was released for road-related expenditure. That should be a worry to us. And that is why you are seeing these figures. If you had improved in the road sector infrastructure, then it means that you are boosting your economic capacity, you are improving roads, and you are also implementing good policies in terms of capital expenditure. So I think these are areas that should take our attention and that we should be looking at. They may be positives, they may be negatives. When we look at all of them, and in any economy, you would have some positives here, you would have some negatives here. Agriculture seems to be declining. The growth rate, if you compare the 2017-18 and half-year figures, agriculture is coming down. I think it's an area that should engage us to see how we can sustain the gains we made as a country and keep at it. Other than that, the bottom line is that revenues are not doing well, like you said. Even with this increment in taxes, they are still going to do the 58. But expenditure is jacked up to 78. I thought government should have been cutting some expenditure. I thought government should have been looking at some of the expenditure.
Okay.
If you want to increase expenditure, then go and look at some of the expenditures around the ministries, especially administration. I'm seeing some figures that I think government should be looking at, getting more efficient and a bit more leaner. These are issues that we'll keep engaging ourselves. These are issues that we'll talk about. My final point is even the first quarter of 2019. You look at goods and services, it's gone up by 33% from the projected to the outturn. These are outturns. If you look at capital expenditure, it's gone down by 45% again. 2017, it went down by 38%. So consistently, you are seeing a huge decline in capital expenditure and an astronomical increment in consumption of goods and services.
Okay.
I think it should be a worry to all of us, and we should begin to look at some of these issues.
Thank you very much. Okay, so, Japamesa, what do you have to say in the next, say, 3 minutes by way of a summary of how you want to project what government has done as regards the budget review to your viewers and listeners?
Well, I guess that it's obvious that we are on track. Yes, there are issues. I'm not saying it's all rosy, but clearly if you look at the macro figures that Prof. Bakpen ably explained, we've made significant improvement from what we inherited, which took us to the IMF and now out of IMF. Clearly, I mean, major gains have been made, and like all of us deduced from the finance minister's presentation, he indicated that indeed we have challenges as a country, and so the need for us to adjust some of the projections for the year and also work to ensure that these targets are met. But for me, critical was that government is being very, very cautious and prudent to ensure that the gains that we've made is not eroded. Because obviously, and many a time we hear both of us, and this is a politician's problem, we tend to downplay or play up the figures when it suits our interests.
Which is unfortunate.
Yes. But the truth of the matter is that these figures are important. And I agree with you entirely that we can only feel it trickle down when there's a sustained you know, benchmarking to ensure that the kinds of distortions that we've had in the past doesn't happen, particularly in the run-up to election 2020. And my comfort is the clear indication from government that it's going to be prudent, it's going to be, as it were, ensure that we stay within the targets that we've set so that our economy does not go into a tailspin as we've had in the past. Major decisions are being taken, our revenue is being worked on, and of course the national identification system that is intended to rope in everybody into the tax net. These are all things that will take time to bear fruits. And
but
so
there's this thing that I don't understand. I was hoping that I could be educated about it. When you say that you have made savings out of sole sourced and restrictive tender processes in excess of 2 billion cedis, what do you mean savings? I don't get it.
The practice in the past, and of course we know that when there's a competition that is introduced in the public procurement space, clearly you potentially could make some savings, as opposed to when there are no competition at all.
So it means you get cheaper or better prices?
Yes.
Okay.
And the practice in the past was that the Public Procurement Authority approved every single transaction that went there.
You can't make this statement.
But these are the figures that the finance
that they
minister
approved every single.
You know what you meant by that. You know what
which were rejected and sent back.
Listening would
there's a national problem.
Did you make some savings? Did you report some savings during your
He's
tenure?
asking him how did they come by that savings? He hasn't answered
What
that.
is savings? Really?
There ought to be a benchmark. Don't you need a
if you are
benchmark
telling
to
me
determine
that you have
savings?
saved
So what is the
much,
benchmark?
For me, I want to know what you mean by
Yes,
what's the
But
basis of
that's
that?
very simple. For instance, if I
Is it compared to the
submit
past?
a sole sourcing proposal of $100 million, and the public procurement agency declines it, and it goes for competitive tender, and we end up paying 80 million. We've made a saving of 20.
You, the minister, didn't do a good job.
Correct?
He didn't do a
But
good job.
I think
You
the point
understand?
here
So,
is that
yes.
the point here is that for a single transaction, it's very easy to talk about the saving. But here is a situation where you are comparing a previous era to the current era.
So it's the cumulative
to make
proposal that went there.
To ensure you are
What is
comparing
the
like for like.
flawed
Well,
analysis.
you can
You
treat
are
it
going
as
to the
flawed.
market. You are going to the. So
But
I'm
the
getting
point
to understand.
is
Now.
that,
You are going to the market
see,
to look for a particular product or some supply of some sort, and you get people offering, 20 CDs, 30 CDs, 40 CDs, and you pick the 20 CDs, or you perhaps get a 10 CD one, and you say, "I have made savings."
No.
So what?
That's you see, the minister was situating the conversation in context. That in the past, what we did with our public procurement was that sole sourcing transactions were approved without question. That's the minister. You can
This is false.
challenge it. He gave
So did he make some comparison, for
Yes,
example?
what were the comparisons?
he
So that-
says
so
that
that-
today,
So that the previous regime bought a TV set, for
Fantastic.
100 Ghana cedis.
Fantastic.
And in this regime,
Or they build a school, 6
in this
classroom
regime,
unit block.
it was bought for 50 Ghana cedis.
Fantastic.
Is that the case?
but that's the cumulative effect of what he said.
Okay.
Today, classroom blocks that were constructed for 400,000 cedi under your special development initiative, you are constructing them for 870,000.
That's not true.
I think
And you
it
come
would
and tell
be
us that
even
you did
more
savings.
compelling if
Right.
we were able to
It's
say
flawed.
that for every 10 contracts that were awarded on a sole sourcing basis, similar contracts
Fantastic.
were awarded
Fantastic.
under open sourcing. And this is how much savings was
But
recorded.
that's exactly what the minister
Then,
put out.
I think that there's some element of that in there. I think it will be good to maybe take our
Highlight
time and understand the methodology they are using.
Okay.
It will be premature. I cannot comment because I don't have that methodology. But I'm curious that.
But you recall that the president mentioned this in the State of the Nation address.
Yeah.
This is
There's significant savings that would
maybe NDC during our time.
I think we should take
Even in dollar terms.
Whether it's like
maybe because of inflation. Let's use dollar terms.
Yes, we can
This was $1.
but, you know,
And the MPP, they are buying it for, say, half of that dollar. So we are making a savings of, say, 50 cents or whatever. Then you are comparing apples with apples. But if you say that sole sourcing was the order of the day, you are doing competitive tendering, and so you've made savings. What kind of cock and bull story is this?
Okay. So this is what he said, and we are running out of time. He said, to highlight the point, Mr. Speaker, in a space of 31 months, from January 2017, your own regime, to July 2019, by reviewing contracts that were either sole sourced or procured through restrictive tender, the Akufo-Addo administration has made savings of 2.75 billion. Then he breaks it down. Then he says, Mr. Speaker, permit me to compare these savings made by the Public Procurement Authority under this administration to what happened under the previous one. Even though more contracts were awarded through sole sourcing and restrictive tender annually,
He says that even
than
though
any year under this government, in 2013, savings registered 0 cedis, 2014 again, 0 cedis, 2015,
and this finance
0
minister.
cedis.
This is the finance minister.
Because there was no review.
All right.
So
what do you make about that? What do you make about this kind of comparison? Thank you. What do you make about this kind of comparison? Is there anything he's compared?
I can't see the comparison, which is why it's a bit difficult for me to appreciate whether it's like for like comparison. I wish that we were able to go behind and understand that it is
a year-to-year
spending or
comparison.
contract of certain criteria, and that the criteria being compared under this regime is actually the same as it was in previous regime.
All right.
I believe there are standard spending.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry, but this is where this all time will allow us. This all time will allow us. And
But all that information is on the website.
Sorry. I wanted to point out something about no condition was changed from president to condition subsequent. I'm reading a document from the Finance Ministry, and it shows clearly that there was conversion of CP number 4 to condition subsequent.
But I made the point.
Okay.
Here.
Right.
I'm saying that there was the guarantee.
Thank you very much.
That was not changed as
Let's go.
John has
Thank
put
you
out.
very much. Thank you very much. And my
guarantee was
guests
changed
have
to
been
condition subsequent.
John Abdullahi Janapo,
Your statement.
Doris a chartered banker, and CEO, Crescendo Consult Limited. Godfred A. Bokping is economist and professor of finance at the University of Ghana. Ejapa Mesa, MP Secondary. Thank you all very much for tuning in. God willing, next week we come your way with another edition of Newsfile. I'm Samson Ladia Yanini. My outfit, as always, is by Latida.